Dear listeners, a new day and a new story to discuss. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that interests me. Listen and write down what you think about this situation. I'm interested in your opinions. You ever think about seeing other people? My husband, Alex, asked hesitantly one evening after we put the kids to bed. My heart stopped. Are you not happy with us? He quickly shook his head. No, it's not that. I don't know. Maybe it would make things more exciting. You know, a little spice. We've been married for 15 years, and things had admittedly grown stale. Between work, raising two kids, and maintaining a home, the passion seemed to have faded. After much discussion, we decided to open our marriage. It was meant to be a journey of rediscovery for both of us, a way to bring that spark back. The suggestion to open our marriage kept ringing in my ears long after our conversation. It felt like a bold, almost reckless step. But somewhere deep inside, curiosity sparked. Would this be the key to rejuvenating our stale relationship? Days turned into weeks, and the idea began to take root. We found ourselves discussing ground rules one night, sitting awkwardly at our kitchen table, a world away from our usual Netflix and chill routine. We need to be honest with each other. No secrets, I said, feeling a strange sense of empowerment mixed with fear. Absolutely, Alex agreed. And if either of us feels uncomfortable, we stop. No questions asked. It sounded simple, yet the weight of the decision was heavy. I remember the first time I went out. My hands were shaking as I dressed up, glancing at myself in the mirror. Alex watched with an unreadable expression. Have fun, he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. The bar was crowded, buzzing with life. I felt out of place initially, nursing a drink at the corner table. That's when I noticed a man across the room, his gaze fixed on me. Our eyes met, and my heart skipped a beat. His name was Jake. He sauntered over, oozing confidence. You look like you're a world away from here, he said, flashing a charming smile. Maybe I am, I replied, surprised at my own daring. The conversation flowed easily, and soon, I was laughing genuinely, feeling a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. His hand brushed mine, sending shivers down my spine. I knew I was treading dangerous waters but couldn't, or perhaps didn't want to, pull away. When I returned home late that night, Alex was awake, sitting in the dimly lit living room. How did it go? He asked, trying to sound nonchalant. I hesitated, then decided to be honest. It was exciting. I met someone. He nodded, a complex mix of emotions flickering across his face. In the following weeks, the escapades with Jake became frequent. I was like a moth drawn to a flame, knowing the risks but unable to resist the allure. Our meetings were filled with passion, a stark contrast to the comfortable companionship I shared with Alex. One evening, I returned home to find Alex waiting up again. There was something different about him this time. Did you? His voice trailed off, laden with unspoken questions. Yes, I whispered. The air between us was thick with unsaid words. There was a long pause. I met someone too, Alex finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt a jolt of surprise and an unexpected pang of jealousy. But this was the path we had chosen, wasn't it? A journey into the unknown, driven by a desire to rekindle what we once had. Yet, nothing prepared me for the day I found out I was pregnant. My world, already teetering on the edge of a delicate balance, began to crumble. It was the beginning of a tumultuous journey, one that would test the very foundations of my life and the relationships I cherished. I met Jake at a local bar a few months later. He was everything Alex wasn't: spontaneous, wild, and full of adventure. It was just meant to be a fling, nothing serious. You make me feel alive, Jake whispered in my ear one evening. I felt the same, but I couldn't say it aloud. The months flew by, and with them, our secret meetings multiplied. It wasn't just physical anymore. We were emotionally involved, and I found myself torn between two worlds. Then, the unexpected happened. I was pregnant. Jake was the father. The truth of my pregnancy hit me like a freight train. I sat there, holding the test, my mind racing with a million thoughts. How was I going to tell Alex? Jake? Our family? It was Jake I reached out to first. I needed to tell him, needed him to say something, anything that would anchor me to reality. We met at the same bar where it all began, the irony of it not lost on me. His face changed the moment I uttered the words, I'm pregnant. Jake's reaction was a mixture of shock and disbelief. Are you sure it's? He started to ask but didn't finish. Yes, it's yours, I said quietly, the weight of those words heavy in the air. I need time to think about this, he stammered, then left abruptly, leaving me alone with my chaos. The following days were a blur. I knew I had to tell Alex. The secret was eating me up inside. One evening, with the kids at my mom's, I sat him down. His face was calm, but his hands, tightly clasped on the table, betrayed his tension. "Alex, I'm pregnant," I began, the words coming out in a rush. "And it's Jake's." I saw the color drain from his face. He stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. When he finally spoke, his voice was laced with hurt and anger. "How could you be so careless? We agreed to no strings, no complications." I reached out to him, but he recoiled. "I'm sorry, Alex. I never wanted to hurt you, hurt us." "Hurt us," he echoed, a bitter laugh escaping him. "You've done more than that. You've torn everything apart." He left the room, and I was alone again, swallowed up by a deafening silence. I thought telling Alex was hard, but facing my parents was a nightmare. They were traditional, and the news of me being pregnant with another man's child while still married was more than they could bear. My father wouldn't even look at me. "You've disgraced us," my mother hissed, tears of disappointment in her eyes. "What about your children? Think about how this will affect them." Her words stung. I had thought about our kids, but in the whirlwind of emotions and decisions, I hadn't considered the full impact. The fear of their reaction kept me awake at night. I decided to talk to them, to explain things before they heard it from someone else. My daughter, Lily, and son, Max, listened in silence as explained. The disappointment and confusion in their eyes were almost too much to bear. "Why, Mom? Why would you do this to our family?" Lily's voice cracked, her words cutting through me. I thought it would make things better," I stammered, but my words sounded hollow, even to me. They left the room, leaving me in a pool of regret and sorrow. I had imagined many scenarios when Alex and I decided to open our marriage, but none of them included the sheer pain and heartbreak I was experiencing. It was then that I realized the magnitude of what I had done. The quest for excitement and passion had led me down a path with consequences I wasn't prepared for. My family, my anchor, was slipping away, and I was powerless, watching the life I had built crumble around me. "How could you?" Alex's voice trembled as I confessed. "This was supposed to be fun, casual. But you brought another life into this? Our kids will be affected." "I'm so sorry," I cried. "I never meant for this to happen." Alex couldn't look at me. "I need some time." The news spread like wildfire. My parents, staunch believers in traditional values, were livid. "You've disgraced our family," my mother shouted. My teenage kids couldn't understand. "Why would you do this, Mom?" my daughter sobbed. Feeling isolated and overwhelmed, I turned to Jake, hoping he'd be my anchor. But his response was cold. "This isn't my problem," he said, leaving me even more devastated. In the wake of my confession, our home became a battleground of emotions. Alex moved to the guest room, and our interactions were limited to terse exchanges about necessary logistics. The children, caught in the middle, wore their confusion and hurt like a cloak, their eyes often red-rimmed and teary. Then, one morning, I awoke to find Alex sitting at the edge of the bed, his back to me. The early light cast long shadows across the room, mirroring the darkness that had descended on our lives. "I can't do this," he said without turning. His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth I had once known. "This situation, it's eating me alive." My throat tightened. "Alex, please, we can figure this out." He finally looked at me, his eyes a mirror of the pain I felt. "Figure this out? Help Sarah? There's a baby on the way that isn't mine. Our kids are falling apart. What's there to figure out?" I reached for him, but he stood up, distancing himself. "I need space. I've contacted a lawyer. I think it's best if we start talking about divorce." The word divorce hung in the air, a final nail in the coffin of our marriage. I watched him leave, feeling a part of me leave with him. As the days passed, the tension in the house grew. I felt like an outcast in my own home. My parents stopped calling, and when I tried reaching out, my calls went unanswered. The few friends I confided in offered sympathy but couldn't hide their shock and judgment. I was alone in a way I had never been before. Jake's silence during this time was deafening. When he finally reached out, we met at a park, a stark contrast to the hidden corners we used to favor. Seeing him, a mix of anger and desperation surged within me. "You left me to deal with this alone," I accused. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "This isn't how I expected things to go. I'm not ready for this, Sarah. A child? It changes everything." His words were like a slap. I had secretly harbored a hope that he would stand by me, but that hope was now shattered. "So, what are you saying?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "I can't be a part of this." It's too complicated. I'm sorry." With those final words, he walked away, leaving me standing alone, more lost than ever. My children's reactions were the hardest to bear. They understood little of the complexities of adult relationships and decisions. Their innocence had been a buffer against the harsh realities of life, but now they were faced with a truth that altered their perception of family, love, and trust. I remember trying to explain to them, to make them see that adults sometimes make mistakes, that we're not perfect. But how do you explain such adult failings to children whose world should be filled with simple joys and security? "Why, Mom? Didn't you love us enough to think about us first?" Max asked one night, his voice small and broken. Each word felt like an accusation, a reminder of the selfishness of my actions. I hugged him, trying to shield him from the storm I had caused, but the barrier between us was palpable. At night, I'd lie awake, listening to the silence of the house. The loneliness was overwhelming, a stark reminder of the consequences of my choices. I had opened a door, seeking excitement and a new spark for life, only to find myself in a hurricane of heartache and judgment. My family, the very core of my being, was now fractured, possibly beyond repair. In those moments of solitude and despair, I realized the gravity of what I had lost. The reality of my situation was a heavy burden, one that I would carry with me through the dark days ahead. Divorce papers landed on our kitchen table. Alex had decided he couldn't live with the constant reminder of my betrayal. "I loved you, you know? I thought this would bring us closer. But now, I don't even recognize you," he said, tears streaming down his face. I felt like the world was closing in on me. I had lost my family, the love of my life, and the respect of my parents. Even my friends looked at me with pity. I was alone, bearing the weight of my decisions. As my pregnancy advanced, the atmosphere at home grew colder. Alex had started the divorce proceedings, his interactions with me now strictly formal, as if we were strangers conducting an unpleasant business deal. The children oscillated between silence and outbursts, unable to process the upheaval in our family. One evening, amidst this chaos, my mother called. Her voice was stern, each word sharp and clear. "We need to talk, Sarah. I'm coming over tomorrow." The call ended before I could respond, leaving me anxious and restless. The next day, I opened the door to find both my parents standing there, their expressions stern and unyielding. We sat in the living room, the tension thick and suffocating. "Sarah, we've been talking," my mother began, her voice a mix of anger and sorrow. "What you've done, it's unforgivable. But you're still our daughter, and we're concerned about the grandkids." Their offer was to take Lily and Max temporarily, to provide them with a stable environment amidst the turmoil. The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. They wanted to take my children away, even if it was for their own good. "You can't take them away from me," I said, my voice trembling. "We're thinking about what's best for them," my father interjected, his tone final. The discussion turned into an argument, voices raised, accusations thrown. I stood my ground, refusing to let my children go, but the rift between us deepened. Amidst this family storm, the day of my first prenatal checkup arrived. I sat in the doctor's office, alone and vulnerable, longing for support. The ultrasound screen showed a tiny heartbeat, a bittersweet moment that I had no one to share with. Returning home, I found an envelope on my doorstep. It was from Alex's lawyer, detailing the proposed divorce settlement and custody arrangements. Reading through the cold, legal language, detailing the division of our life together, I felt an overwhelming sense of loss. Alex was pushing for joint custody, but the underlying message was clear. Our family, as I knew it, was over. In the following weeks, the strain took its toll. My health started to deteriorate, the stress manifesting in physical symptoms. One night, a sharp pain seized me, and I found myself rushing to the hospital, fear gripping my heart. Lying in the hospital bed, after the doctors had managed to stabilize me and the baby, I realized just how alone I had become. Alex came to the hospital, his face etched with concern, but the warmth that once existed between us was gone, replaced by a courteous detachment. "How are you feeling?" he asked, maintaining a careful distance. "Scared," I replied honestly, a lump forming in my throat. "Scared and alone." He didn't respond, and we sat in silence, the unspoken words hanging heavily between us. His visit was brief, and as he left, a profound sense of emptiness enveloped me. The days turned into weeks, and my due date approached. The house, once filled with laughter and love, now echoed with the sounds of my solitary footsteps. My parents kept their distance, only reaching out to check on the kids. Jake was a closed chapter, just another painful memory in a series of regrets. As I braced myself for the birth, the reality of my situation became increasingly clear. I was about to bring a new life into a world that had been turned upside down, into a fragmented family filled with hurt and resentment. The pieces of my life lay shattered around me, and as I tried to pick them up, I wondered if they could ever be put back together again. My daughter was the first to approach me. One day, she walked into my room, sat down, and said, "I might not understand or agree, but you're still my mom." It was a tiny ray of hope. The birth of my baby boy was bittersweet. Holding him, I felt a mix of immense love and profound guilt. Slowly, with time, I began rebuilding my life. I attended therapy, joined support groups, and tried to mend the fractured relationships. My parents, seeing the struggles I faced alone, gradually started speaking to me again. Alex and I found a way to co-parent our children, though the romantic aspect of our relationship was gone forever. In the end, I learned that life doesn't always turn out the way we plan. But with resilience and love, we can find our way back to happiness, even if it's different from what we once envisioned. The birth of my daughter, Ava, was a whirlwind of pain and emotion. I held her for the first time, her tiny fingers curling around mine, a symbol of new beginnings amidst my broken world. Her arrival didn't bring the reconciliation I had secretly hoped for, but it did bring a new perspective. Alex visited the hospital. His gaze lingered on Ava, a complex mix of emotions passing over his face. He offered to help, but his offer was more out of obligation than any desire to reconnect with me. "She's beautiful," he said softly, his voice betraying a hint of the tenderness that had once defined us. "Thank you," I replied, fighting back tears. His presence, once my source of comfort, now felt like a reminder of all that was lost. Returning home was daunting. I was a single mother, juggling the needs of a newborn with the emotional turmoil of my other children. Lily and Max were curious about their new sister, but wary of the change she represented. One afternoon, I sat down with them, Ava asleep in my arms. I apologized for the pain I had caused, trying to explain my actions without justifying them. I talked about the importance of family, of sticking together even when things fall apart. They listened, their young faces serious and thoughtful. Healing, I knew, would take time. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into caring for Ava and rebuilding my relationship with Lily and Max. I started attending a support group for single parents, finding comfort and advice in shared experiences. Alex and I began a tentative communication centered around the kids' welfare. Our conversations, though awkward, were a step towards a co-parenting arrangement that didn't involve lawyers or bitter arguments. During one such exchange, he surprised me. "I've been thinking," he began hesitantly, "about the kids, and you. Maybe we can try family counseling. Not for us, but for them." I was taken aback. "Really? You think that would help?" "It's worth a try," he said, and for a moment, I saw a glimmer of the old Alex, the one who believed in fixing things rather than throwing them away. Counseling was hard. Unpacking our feelings, the hurt, and betrayal in front of a stranger felt raw and exposing. But it brought clarity. We understood how our actions affected our children and learned ways to communicate and support them through this transition. Life settled into a new routine. I found a part-time job, relishing the opportunity to engage with the world outside my immediate chaos. The balance was hard to strike, and there were days I felt overwhelmed, but each step felt like progress. One day, I received a call from Jake. He had heard about Ava's birth and wanted to meet her. I hesitated, the old pain surfacing. But then I thought of Ava, of her right to know her father, regardless of the complexities. We met at a park, the autumn leaves ablaze of color around us. Jake held Ava, something in his demeanor softening as he looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "For everything." I nodded, accepting his apology, not for my sake but for Ava's. We agreed that he would be a part of her life, but I knew the journey would be fraught with challenges. As I watched Lily and Max play, their laughter a balm to my weary heart, I realized that rebuilding wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about new structures, new ways of being a family. We were damaged, yes, but not irreparably so. Looking at Ava, sleeping peacefully in her stroller, I knew the road ahead would be filled with obstacles. But for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. Not just for me, but for all of us. We were learning, growing, and slowly healing. Our story wasn't over. It was just taking a new path, one that I was determined to tread with all the love and strength I could muster. The pieces of my life, once shattered, were coming together, forming a different picture, perhaps more beautiful for having been broken.